So today I have the honor of introducing a very special person to all of us because she's a member of our club and she adds so much value by being here. And the more I get to know her, the more impressed I am with just the presence of her and what she's accomplished in life. So, empowering educator and author, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to introduce a remarkable woman who weaves her passion for faith into the fabric of daily life. Mary Posa Cummins, an author whose work, Taking the Holy Spirit to Work, inspires Christians to bring their whole selves to their professions. Today, Mary steps into her role as an educator, guiding us through the complexities of the Armenian genocide. Her deep understanding of history and dedication to teaching promise an engaging and thought-provoking session with a life dedicated to service and education, and her roots firmly planted in her family and faith. Mary is here to offer us not just a history lesson, but a message of perseverance and hope, which we all need, don't we? Thank you.
So years ago, my friend and colleague Susan Sarah told me about the Armenian genocide. Both her sets of grandparents were survivors. I was a history teacher for a number of years and a lover of history, and I had not heard of it. But then I did further research and I integrated it into my 7th grade curriculum. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Armenian genocide because today is April 11th, and on April 24th, it will be our Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. Okay, can't see that real fast. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But you're probably thinking, who after all speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? I'm going to come back to that quote at the end. But before I move forward, I want to talk very quickly about what a genocide is. A genocide, by United Nations definition, has 2 criteria. It has to be thought about. In other words, there's a systematic plan, and it's thought about and planned by a government. So if you can imagine a terrible imagination of the Nazis sitting around the table, planning the final solution. Okay, so it has to be thought about by a government, and then it has to be executed. That is a genocide carried out by the government. So in the case of the Armenian genocide, the Armenians were the victims, and the perpetrators were the Ottoman Turks. So take a look at Armenia, a small country in Central Asia. It's bordered by Azerbaijan, it's bordered by Turkey, and it's bordered to the north by Georgia. It has a distinct history. In 301, in AD 301, it was the first nation or first country in history to adopt Christianity as its official state religion. It also, throughout history, has been conquered. It was conquered by the Persian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and then later on the Soviet Union. So we have Armenia here, and at this point in history that we're going to talk about today, Armenia was part of the Ottoman Empire and had been part of the Ottoman Empire since about the 16th century. The Ottoman Empire, that would be it's set in Turkey, okay, but then they spread. They conquered other nationalities and ethnicities. So when we look at the 1580, you see that they're in Central Asia, Southwest Asia, Eastern Europe, as well as North Africa. But then the empire shrinks, and empires do not like to shrink, okay? They like to keep control of the land. So as you can see, by the eve of World War I in 1913, the Ottoman Empire has shrunk. So the problem is now that the Ottomans want to rebuild their empire. And we're looking at a time in history when these ethnicities, these nationalities, especially on the Balkan Peninsula in Europe, they want their autonomy, they want their independence. So the problem is for the Ottoman Empire that if Armenia gets its independence, they will not be able to spread their empire back east. So let's go ahead quickly and review World War I, because you need to have the basis of what happened during World War I, because it is so tied to the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide occurred during the war. So World War I was from 1914 to 1918. 2 sides, if you recall from your history lessons way back when. We have the Allied side, which was Great Britain, France, Russia before they got into their 2 revolutions and they pulled out of the war, and then the latecomers, the United States. And then the Central Powers, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or Austria-Hungary. Of course, there were other countries that were part of both sides, but these are the major players. The causes of World War I were imperialism and nationalism. These empires did not want to lose control of their lands, and the people that they were controlling wanted to be independent. So that's the cause. Now, in Armenia, there was suspicion by the Ottoman government that Armenians were going to rise up. So let's go to this picture that is sort of when you talk about the Armenian genocide, this is the iconic picture. April 24th is the date of the start, 1915 is the date of the start of the Armenian genocide. The story behind this picture is that these men were rounded up from a village in what is present-day Armenia, Jasaria. It actually has a different name today. And then they were taken to the outskirts of the village and executed about an hour after the photo was taken. This story is not true. But the story that is true about this photo is far more compelling. So I want to share that with you. You're fine there, because it's the same photo. But before we move on, April 24th, then, is the beginning of Armenian genocide, because Jasaria was not the only village where Armenian men were rounded up. It was in other villages and also in Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. In any genocide, the first people to be rounded up would be your leaders in the community. Your intellectuals, your journalists, your civic leaders, your teachers, your college presidents, your prominent business people. And that is what the men in this picture, 51 Armenian men in this picture. The whole idea is to figuratively behead the community, leave them without leadership so it's easier to control the rest of the people. Now, in the Armenian genocide, there was actually literal beheading used a lot, but I took those photos out because it's lunchtime and I wasn't sure how you would respond. But literal beheading and heads on spikes was common. But in this photo, why was it taken? It was taken because, well, this is the assumption, and I think it's probably a good assumption, that the bureaucrat, the Ottoman bureaucrat that was assigned to deal with the Armenian problem in this area, wanted to prove to the higher ups that he was doing something. Who took the picture? The police went to a photography store owned by an Armenian man, pulled him out of his store, didn't even allow him to lock his door, and he's the one who took the picture. There aren't other photos because the Ottomans did not want to document what they were doing, okay? So we have now a man, and we're going to 2005 right now, a man named Stephen Kirkjian. Stephen Kirkjian is an investigative reporter for the Boston Globe. And if you remember, some of you might remember back in 1990, the world's the largest art heist in history, where 13 paintings were taken from a Boston art gallery, and the paintings were never recovered. There was Rembrandts that were stolen and a Manet, not a Monet, but a Manet. Well, this is the same investigative reporter that's going to investigate this photo, but he has a personal stake in investigating this photo. His grandfather was killed in the Armenian genocide, and his father survived it. So he starts investigating, and of course he goes to Turkey. Now, the Turkish government to this day denies it was a genocide. And so he's not going to find a whole lot in the archives, but what he does find is the newspaper article with the photo. But then, really close to home, like within like a half mile to a mile of his home, there is a woman who has the photo, and it is obviously yellowed, and it appears that there was cellophane tape at one point, and this list of names in Armenian of the men in the photo. She had the photo, he found her, and this was where he's suddenly able to now be able to tell the stories of these people that were murdered in the Armenian genocide. One of the men in the photo was college professor and a college president. Before he was rounded up, he gave his prized fountain pen to his wife and said, please, whichever one of my three sons is the most like me, give them the pen. All three sons made it to the United States, and they still have that pen today. Let me back up a little bit and tell you something else about this photo before I tell you more about the men. The men in this photo were arrested. They're arrested for being suspicious, actually just because they were community leaders, but the charges were basically that you're going to conspire against the Ottoman government. In groups of 4 and 5, they were put on trial after they had been held in prison for several weeks and tortured. The torture was beating them at the bottom of their feet was part of the torture. They were not allowed to defend themselves, and the trials were very quick. And all but 2 of the men were found guilty. The 2 men that were acquitted might as well have been found guilty. One was put on an ox cart with 24 other Armenians, and the ox cart was sent out to a remote area. And what the Ottoman government had done was they had released Turkish prisoners from the prisons and told them, go out and find Armenians. They were killing squads. Go into the countryside, find Armenians and kill them. So these men were killed. The other one that was acquitted was never to be heard from again. So I don't know. Don't know if he got away. Just don't know. Another man in this picture was what was going to happen, because in 1895, go back. In 1895, there were similar attacks against the Armenians by the Ottomans. So 20 years before. So he saw what was going to happen. He can feel the rise in the country again. So he sent his son to the United States ahead of time. His son started working, I believe it was for the Boston Transit, and he met attorney, his name was Louis Brandeis. For those of you who know, he became a Supreme Court justice. And Louis Brandeis actually helped him with the immigration papers to get his mother to come into the United States. There was another man who they went into his home to look for evidence against him. Could not find evidence, but they did find an antique gun. In 1908, the Armenians had been given the right to bear arms in the Ottoman Empire, so it wasn't illegal that he had the gun. The other thing about the gun was that it was actually an antique gun that was given to him as a gift from the Ottoman government for some sort of feat that he had accomplished. And it was a trophy, a prize. So he was tried for having a weapon. After the trial, 11 of the men were taken immediately and hanged in the village center. Eventually, others were hanged. There was one man in this photo. He was the only Armenian banker in the area. And at one point in time, he had given money to the Ottoman government. So he had a place on the city council as well. So he was sentenced to 10 years hard labor. But the story is that he also eventually ended up on one of those ox carts and ended up being murdered as well. So that's the beginning of the Armenian genocide, April 24th, 1915. This situation happened in other areas. We just know more about this because of this particular photo. Now, Armin T. Wegner, he was a pacifist and he was a German medic. I just listened to, I actually found an interview of him, and he worked for the Red Cross because some of the documentation says he was in the German army, but in the interview he said he was a medic for the Red Cross. As he was entering into the lands that are controlled by the Ottoman Empire, he sees what is happening. He sees what is going on, and he starts taking photos. Well, it's illegal to take the photos, so he's eventually caught. But he was able to, in his belt, hide some of the negatives. And he was sent to work in a clinic, got malaria, eventually made his way back to Germany. He was one of the only people that was outspoken against the Ottomans, against their treatment of the Armenians. Later, he was outspoken in Germany against the Nazis and their treatment of the Jews, and he was sent to a concentration camp. He survived though, and actually lived to an old age. But Armin T. Wegner, most of the pictures that we have, which are very few of the Armenian genocide, are from this man. So in the genocide, one of the ways that the murders, the executions occurred was by putting people onto barges, loading them onto barges, and then blowing the barge up. Then we can go to the next photo here. The Armenian men, remember I said Armenia had been part of the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years at this point. So they were used to fighting alongside the Ottomans. So the Armenian men, when they showed up with their guns, okay, to serve in the war, their guns were taken and they were given shovels, and they were put basically into slave labor to dig the trenches, and then moved over to concentration camps. They're mixed with the women and the children and older people were deported. Go ahead, Dan. The next one. And as they were deported into the Syrian desert. So many were crammed into trains. And if they didn't get malaria, they certainly were going to dehydrate. And if they survived that, they died at the hands of roaming nomads in the Syrian desert. All right, and Dan, next photo. This is also 1990 as well. In 1990, many remains of Armenians were found in the Syrian desert. So these are people going to pay homage to, and there's a memorial. You can see the little chapel back there. And this was a memorial to the Armenians that ISIS in 2014 saw fit. The Ottoman government to this day, excuse me, not the Ottoman government, the Turkish government denies that it was actually a genocide. They said, no, it wasn't a genocide, it was World War I. It was World War I. That's why 1.5 million Armenians were killed, 70% of the Armenian population. The United States government has made it a practice to not call it a genocide. However, there was a slip by Ronald Reagan in 1981, and then another slip, I think it was last year, by Joe Biden, calling it a genocide. Turkey is an ally, they're a member of NATO, and unfortunately that sort of drives the US response to genocide. The question once again is, who after all speaks today of the annexation? Does anybody know who said that other than Susan Sorrow? Hitler. Hitler knew that the world didn't speak up against what happened with the Armenians, and he knew that he could get away with murdering 11 million people. 6 million were Jews. Other people that were targeted were homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, trade unionists, anyone who spoke out against him, and gypsies. So he knew that the world and knew that he can get away with perpetrating the murder of a. Any questions?
Excuse me.
I feel like history is repeating itself again with what's happened in Israel and Gaza with the occupation of over 75 plus years. And a lot of people do not want to call it a genocide when it's 100% of a genocide. So once again, history is repeating itself. We have a government that does not want to identify that it is a genocide. And it's pretty sad, actually, that people are so complicit about it.
One of the things regarding genocide again is that it the definition is carried out by a government. So, yes.
Thanks, that's great information.
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious. I've heard all about the Ottoman Empire, throughout the years. We never really knew what it was. What type of a government structure did they have? What kind of a political structure was it? Like a socialism or communism or empire like the Roman Empire?
Empire is a very authoritarian because really it's kind of difficult to keep an empire for that long without being authoritarian as well, except I guess for the most part. But as far as, you know, I don't really know much more regarding the Ottoman Empire other than that. Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, I couldn't answer that more. Come back next week and I'll look that up. Yeah. Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, hi, Richard.
Hi, how are you? Quick question for you. And I know you're a history buff and you've studied history. What would be the oldest genocide?
I can't think of off the top of my head what the name of these peoples were. But there was a group of people in sub-Saharan Africa that it's considered one of the older genocides. It's not considered the oldest genocide. And again, there's that whole geopolitical definition of carried out by a government versus mass killing or versus we say we're defending ourselves, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, but this is the first genocide of the 20th century, not the last genocide of the 20th century. And of course, we also have the Rwandan genocide, the Holocaust, or for Bosnia, which would be 21st century. So.
Trying to provide fine detail from the map here, but two questions. At the start of World War I, was Armenia still a part of the Ottoman territory?
Yes.
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 Okay, because I couldn't quite see here.
Was at the start of World War I,
Right.
it was a rise in nationalism.
Yeah.
The Ottomans were afraid that they.
That's what I thought, but does it look like, you know, the.
Yeah.
Up here.
The Armenian land has shifted somewhat too. I mean, it's gotten smaller and throughout history and everything, the boundaries have changed. Okay, so who's going to tell us the first genocide? Northern Africa, Carthage, and it wasn't Carthage committing the genocide. It was killing the people in Carthage, wasn't it? Yeah, I think, yeah.
It goes way back.
Probably, man, it's not a new thing. And one of the things that, the seventh graders, my whole big unit on this was trying to understand that there are bully perpetrators, there are bystanders, there are upstanders, and there are victims. Which are you going to be? Anything else? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to thank you for this program. It's really interesting. What I find a challenge is with the news focusing on soundbites so much. We don't hear enough about not only historic genocide, but there are genocides all over the world happening right now where millions of people are getting killed from Africa to Southeast Asia, and we don't hear about them. 1 million Muslims in China are in concentration camps. So we need to make sure that when there are genocides that qualify as that horrific act, they're called that. But we also don't want to call something a genocide when it's not a genocide, because that is an insult to the people who have been killed and whose families have been affected by true genocide.
Exactly.
Representing.
Exactly. And thank you guys for letting me put my teacher hat back on again. So thank you.